Turn to chapter 17, which is page 472. Page 472. Chapter 17 is the valuation chapter. Gosh, we are knocking them down here, aren't we? Getting to the end. I'm glad. I'm sick of looking at y'all. I kid. It is rapidly coming to a close, though. All right, so the valuation chapter is a huge math chapter on the test. There are some ideas we need to talk about from chapter 17 as well. But you should settle in for a lot of math in this chapter. And not only is there a lot of math that we teach in this chapter, it is a lot of math that is tested. I would say probably, no exaggeration, a third of the math on the entire test comes from this chapter. The final exam. The test. The only one that the only one that matters. Not the driving exam. I don't know. Yeah, roughly 19, 20 math questions, and you can expect probably 6 of those to be from this chapter. There are a lot. You must understand the math of this chapter. And what I will tell you before we get into this chapter is the same thing I have told every class for the last several years. My way of teaching valuation may seem silly, but it works. So you can be smart or you can be right, but you cannot be both in this classroom. I promise you in this chapter. When we start doing CMAs, the smarter you are, the worse you will fare. If you don't follow my stupid method, you will go the wrong direction. You will adjust the wrong way. So just suspend reality. Nobody's looking at you. Nobody can. In fact, it warmed my soul last night. I walked past this classroom and I looked in here and I saw 3 people doing this. And I was like, yeah, they got it. Because you'll know what that means in a little while when we get to that section and we start talking about making these adjustments. Use your hands. They help. You need visual aids, and you don't have them on the exams. You have to make your own. And there's a method to my madness. I promise there is. You can wave your arms around all you want to. That's why we separate the tables. You got plenty of arm swing room, to do whatever you need to do. Okay? So when we talk about value, we're talking about the appraisal process. So what is an appraisal? And this is an important definition because I would suspect it might be one that you would see at some point in your future again. An appraisal is a formal opinion of value, and the thing that makes it formal is that it's done by appraisers. We don't do appraisals because we don't have an appraisal license. An appraisal is a formal opinion of value. Do we give opinions of value as real estate brokers? Yes. Absolutely. To who? To what kinds of clients? Sellers, buyers, pretty much all of our clients. If we have a tenant that we're representing, would we give them an opinion of value, what they should be paying for rent for that property? If we're managing a property, should we give the landlord an opinion of value of what they should lease it for? If we represent a seller, should we give them an opinion of value of what we should list it for and what offer we should accept? All of our clients. That's also something you might see in your future. Who should you give? Who are you obligated with a fiduciary responsibility to give an opinion of value? And the answer is any client. Anybody you represent. The only time you wouldn't give necessarily opinions of value is if you found yourself representing somebody but you couldn't give them advice. Gosh, what would that be called? That would be called dual agency. Because if you think about it, you wouldn't want to give an opinion of value to either client because that could be construed as helping one or the other. Okay? So an appraisal is a formal opinion of value, which just means it's done by an appraiser. This last note down here is probably the most important. An appraisal is a prediction at a specific point in time. And what that means is it's only good for the day it's done. That opinion of value is only valid for that day, that one point in time. Because opinions of value are based on the market. And what is the market doing continually? Changing. Absolutely. Changes every single day. Okay? So as real estate brokers, as I said, we certainly do give informal opinions of value. The most common of those is called a CMA. CMA stands for Comparative Market Analysis. What is the root of the word comparative? Compare. And that's exactly what we're doing with the CMA. We are comparing our subject property. So anytime you're trying to come up with a value for a property, we call that the subject property. It's the subject of our opinion of value. So if we're listing a house for sale and we're trying to tell the seller how much they should list for, that house is our subject property. Okay? So a CMA is a system by which we would compare our subject property to other very similar properties that had sold recently. That's why it's called a comparative market analysis. We do also do opinions of value that aren't CMAs, and we're going to talk about those as well. You need to know what a broker price opinion is. A broker price opinion is different than a CMA, but only in one way. You're not doing it for a client. A CMA is an opinion of value you give to your clients, the people you represent. So sellers that you have an active listing agreement with, buyers that you have a buyer agency agreement with. Those are people that you do CMAs for. When you do a CMA for somebody who's not your client, who is never going to be your client and no chance of being your client, that's called a broker price opinion. To give you an example of when that could happen, banks sometimes will want to know what the estimated value of a property is, maybe if the borrower is falling into default. If the borrower is falling into default, what is the bank considering they may have to do? Foreclose, which would mean selling the property eventually. So might they want to have a pretty good idea of what that property might be worth in case they had to foreclose on it? Yeah. So where do they turn to get that opinion of value? Where do you think they come? Real estate brokers. Why not just go to an appraiser? They could get an appraiser to do it. It costs more money, right? I mean, you can certainly do these for free if you'd like, but most of the time, if we're doing these broker price opinions, we are charging a fee for them. And the reason they come to us rather than appraisers is we're cheaper, quite honestly. I would never do one. Marilyn's question was, what would my fee be? And I would not do them because the fees are so ridiculously low that they are not worth the time that it takes for me to do them. Most broker price opinions, $45, $50. These are very, very, well, you have to remember a full appraisal, you're talking about $350, $400. So you're not, you can't really, there's not a lot of, flexibility there in the first place. So, well, you can charge $100 if they're willing to pay you for it. You can charge whatever you like. Remember, there are no going rates, right?
What's the benefit of using this versus just like seeing what Zillow thinks the way it is?
Zillow's a moron.
Right.
Yeah, that's the benefit, is that whoever wrote those algorithms for Zillow should be bashed in the head with a brick. I mean, it just...
A broker price opinion?
No, so a broker price opinion is really good questions. That what validity does it have? Well, first of all, any opinion of value really only is an opinion. So even an appraiser's opinion of value is only valid if you place weight on their opinion. And traditionally banks do place weight on the opinions of appraisers. Broker price opinion is just a way of basically allowing the banks to do what they wanted to do. The banks for years wanted to be able to pay real estate brokers to do these, because what banks said was in residential transactions, a qualified real estate broker could be, I'm not saying this is true, I'm saying this is what the bank's perspective was, that a qualified real estate broker could give you just as good of an opinion of value as an appraiser could, and they could do it faster and cheaper. But for years and years and years, this was illegal. You could not do this in North Carolina. That rule changed 3 years ago now. And so we do allow these broker price opinions. What you need to be aware of are the rules surrounding a broker price opinion, because we treat them differently than any other brokerage service. Number one, what does it say there? Who can perform them? Non-provisional brokers. Folks, if you think about all the things we've talked about in the class, very rarely do we just say there's something that a provisional broker absolutely cannot do. We say they have to do it under somebody's supervision, but these cannot be done by a provisional broker. Can a provisional broker do a CMA? Yes, absolutely. But they can't do a broker price opinion. So the difference here is that they can't be paid a fee to do this thing for somebody who they don't represent. They can do it for somebody they represent, but they can't be paid a fee to do it for somebody who they don't represent. And then you also need to be familiar with this phrase right here. It says BPOs must indicate a probable sales price of a property. If you get tested on BPOs, the two things they're going to test you on are the fact that provisional brokers cannot do them. And this is North Carolina specific rule. Provisional brokers may not do them, and you must report whatever the value is that you give for it. You have to use this phrase, a probable sales price, or probable selling price, or probable lease price if you're doing a rental property. Everybody good on that? Good. Okay. Don't ever use, yes, go ahead, Salim, I'm sorry.
Is there any like accountability or liability in BPOs?
Is there any accountability or liability in doing them? Well, I think generically there's always some level of liability anytime you're performing a professional service. I think ultimately it would really depend on what the BPO was being used for. For example, they can't be used for a mortgage loan. You know, if you know that the bank is contacting you because somebody's applied for a loan on this property and they want your opinion of value as basically the underlying justification for the loan, you have to refuse that. So if you did it anyway, you would certainly have some liability there. Because it's an opinion of value, it's always going to be held up against that. Remember that skill, care, and diligence thing we have with the Real Estate Commission? If you were accused of doing these incorrectly, the Real Estate Commission would weigh, well, what would a reasonable broker have done in the same situation? So it's a very sort of gray area. Okay? Some factors that affect value. You don't need to memorize these. They just mention them in the book, so I always want to give you those as well. Demand. Obviously, the more in demand something is, the more valuable it is. The second one, utility. It's just another word for usefulness. The more useful a property is, the more things you can do with it, the higher the value is of the property. Scarcity. Give me examples of some very valuable land types in general.
Land in Wake County more than a couple acres.
Okay, land in Wake County. How about specific parts of Wake County more valuable than others?
Any land in Wake County at this point.
But it's all the same value?
Inside the belt line.
Downtown Raleigh, inside the Beltline. And why is that more valuable? Because there's what? Less of it. Waterfront property. Why is waterfront property more valuable? There's less of it. You have to go. Lots of people want it, but there's very little of it. So scarcity has a direct impact. And then this last one, transferability. Basically, do you have any limitations on selling the property? Because the more limited you are in how you can sell it, the lower the value is going to be. Essentially, if you have fee simple interest, you don't have any limits on selling it. You're going to get the most possible value. But if you have something like a life estate, is that going to limit your transferability of the property and therefore limit its value? Yeah, absolutely. So we also talk about these ideas of market value, market price, and cost. Market value is an opinion, what it might be worth. We actually define market value with a really long definition, but you don't need to know all of that. I mean, basically, market value is a prediction of what the property would bring if it was marketed properly to the biggest possible audience, and the buyer and the seller both knew what they were doing, and you had all the competition in the world and nothing weird was going on in the transaction. It wasn't being sold to somebody's mama or their brother. There's a really long definition for market value, but the thing you need to remember is it's a prediction. Market value is a prediction. Market price is what it actually sells for. So when we talk about market price, we're talking about this is what it sold for. And this last one is probably at the same time my favorite and least favorite idea in the whole chapter, cost. I cannot tell you how many times in your career, if you go into residential real estate brokerage, you will hear somebody say, I paid blah, 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 blah. After the words I paid, I turned my brain off. Because I don't care what the rest of that paragraph says. And you know why I don't care? Because buyers don't care, which means the market doesn't care. Nobody cares that you paid $150,000 for that pool in the backyard. Because the value of something is what other buyers are willing to pay for it, not what it cost. Okay? And that's one of the hardest bridges to cross with a client when you're actually out there and trying to explain things to them, because they always try to relate it back to, I paid this for it. What's funny, though, is that they never do it in the opposite direction. I've never gone up to a seller and said, how much did you pay for your countertops, these granite countertops you have put in? And they'll say, oh, well, we got them at a good deal. It was $2,200. And I've said, that's a great investment because it's going to bring probably $5,000 when you sell your house. I've never once had a seller go, oh, no, I don't want to get $5,000. I only want to get the $2,200. Just what I paid for it. See, they understand it that way. But when it goes the other way, when they paid $150,000 for the pool and you tell them it might bring $10,000 in value, oh, but it cost me. I don't care. I simply don't care. And that has to be the approach, because when you talk about value, especially predicting market value, is about what buyers are willing to do. And the simple truth is that buyers in our area are largely not willing to pay for a swimming pool. And as a matter of fact, in some cases, it can actually be a detraction from the value of the property, especially if it's in a neighborhood that already has a public pool, like a neighborhood pool, and it takes up the whole backyard. You walk out there, and that's a $50,000 hole in the ground. It actually cost them $100,000 in market value. Well, and people are scared. I mean, I never thought of it this way because I don't have children. But over the years, I learned you take a buyer who has small children into a house with a pool, and it may as well be full of acid. They are terrified of it. They're just terrified their kids are going to drown in the backyard. And so it has a very negative impact on marketing the property in some cases. So, right, they should have got a broker price opinion. That's exactly right. It really is. It's a tough discussion to have, but it's a necessary discussion. This idea of cost. Okay, we've already talked about highest and best use in the class before. Highest and best use is the one thing I can do with the property right now to bring the greatest return on my investment. And we always remember say that highest and best use can do what over time? Can change. You okay? Do we need to call 911? You sure?
It really does.
Does it make it better when I make you the center of attention and everybody stare at you?
Everybody stare.
You really scared me up here. All right, there you go. She caught her breath. Okay, we're good. Nobody call the police. Okay. We need to talk about some principles of value. They're in your book on page, if you want to follow along, 476. Some principles of value. This one, and I do not have slides for each one of these. I don't have slides for each one of these, and here's why. They're all in the book. Why do you think I only have slides for certain ones? Those are the ones that matter, Sean said. Those are the ones that we'll say that are more important. Those are the ones that I think you will have to know and be familiar with for the end of the class. So, the principle of substitution, probably the most important one on the page here. The economic principle of substitution. It's a very simple thing. I call it the Walmart principle. The principle of substitution says that if you have two relatively equal things that are for sale, people are going to buy the cheaper one. And if you think about it, we see that in our economy all over. How did Walmart become the biggest retailer in the world? They've now been passed by Amazon. I realize that, but it certainly wasn't customer service that got them there. Right? Have to be honest. So, given choices, buyers tend to choose the cheaper option. Not all of them. These are not universal rules. But when you look at the biggest pool of buyers possible, and you give them a choice of two relatively equal things, they're always going to choose the one that is the lower price as a group. Now, why that's important to us in the valuation chapter is it gives us the whole idea behind the sales comparison approach. We're going to get to the sales comparison approach in just a second, but let me explain to you how it works. If I look at two very similar properties, I mean very, very similar properties. Let's say they're in the same neighborhood. Let's say they're townhouses in the same building. There's the same floor plan, same living area, same number of bedrooms, bathrooms, amenities. I mean, these things are just down the line. They're exactly the same, except the one was built with a fireplace in the living room, and the other was built without a fireplace in the living room. And I look at what these two things sold for. I see that the one with the fireplace sold for $105,000. And I see that the one without the fireplace sold for $103,000. What's a fireplace worth in that neighborhood? $2,000. That is the principle of substitution. And you need to keep that in mind, because there's going to come a time when you're faced with a math question and you're going to go, oh my God, I don't know what a square foot is worth. Well, hello. They just told you this house was 1,000 square feet and this house was 1,100, and that's the only difference between the two. And one sold for $10,000 more than the other. You ever think for a second that maybe that 100 square feet was worth the $10,000? Does that make sense? That is the principle of substitution. And it is the absolute basis for a CMA, for the sales comparison approach. That's why it's so important. That's why I made a slide for it. Okay? Conformity. The principle of conformity says that you're going to get the greatest return on your investment if you keep your property similar to its surroundings. You're always going to get the greatest return if your property is similar to the other properties around it. That is the principle of conformity. And obviously we use words like over-improvement to talk about this idea. Over-improvement would be, you live in a neighborhood of 2,000 square foot houses mostly, and you keep adding on to your house until it's 4,000 square feet. You're probably not going to get a great return on investment on that because you don't conform to your surroundings. The principle of conformity says that you'll get the greatest return when you are similar to your surroundings. And then the principle of contribution simply says that the value of any one thing about a property, one feature, is equal to the value that would be gone if you took it away. So our fireplace. If we took away the fireplace and we lost $2,000 in value, then the fireplace must be worth $2,000. Okay? That is the idea of contribution. Now we start to get into the three approaches to value. Yes, go ahead, Michaela. Whatever value it contributes to the overall property. So, I can look at a property and say it would sell for this with the fireplace, it would sell for this without the fireplace. This is the value of the fireplace. And we do that all the time with things we shop for. If you went and shopped for a car that had, the base model rims on it, and it was $30,000, but with the chrome plated rims, it's $32,000. Well, what's the value of the chrome plated rims? $2,000. These are not overly complex ideas. It's just we start dealing with big numbers and people get intimidated by the big numbers. Appraisers aren't that smart either. Trust me, I've met a lot of them. Okay? Sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income capitalization approach. These are the three methods or approaches to coming up with a value for real estate. Now, if you remember all the way back to chapter 1, I told you that I didn't like to break things down into 5 categories of real estate. You remember they said residential, and then they said there was commercial and industrial and special use and agricultural. Remember all that? And I said I like 3 classes of property. This is why I like 3 classes of property, because how many ways are there to value property? 3. 1 for each class. Does anybody remember what I said the 3 classes of property were back there in chapter 2? Residential, stuff I own because I want to do what? Live in it. Stuff I own because I want to live in it. Sales comparison approach. That's what we use the sales comparison approach for. Now we've tacked vacant land on there, but we use the sales comparison approach to value stuff we bought because we want to live in it. Okay? What did I say the second category of real estate was? Stuff I want to make money with. Income producing property. Income capitalization approach. That's the way we value income producing property. And then what was the third category of real estate? Anything else. Special use properties. The cost approach. So churches, police stations, fire departments, things that don't sell, so they don't really have a market value per se, but we need to come up with a valuation for them anyway. Why would I need to predict the value of a library? It's not going to sell, so why do I need to be able to predict the value of it? Well, maybe tax purposes, but maybe let's say it's tax exempt. I'll even throw that in there. No taxes on it. The land has value. What if that thing catches on fire? Insurance. We need to insure these properties, and to insure them, don't we have to come up with some value for the insurance policies? So that's why we have to be able to value even those properties. Yes, sir, son.
What do you mean special use properties that is not going to sell?
When was the last time you saw a school go for sale? Or a library? Or a fire department? They don't sell. That's what I mean. Simply, these are kinds of properties that just do not sell often enough for us to have any point of comparison. How are you going to predict? Remember, the whole point of the chapter is to predict the value of something, right? Well, for the sales comparison approach to work, you need to compare it to things that have done what? Sold. I can't compare a library to other libraries that have sold. Good luck finding one.
They do sell, but not for that. Because I'm thinking the building itself might sell and someone else might have a different use for it.
Yeah, but you're thinking about the exception times 27,000 when you talk about something like that. Again, I asked you a simple question. When was the last time you saw a library sell? See, the very fact that you have to sit there and think, well, I never heard of that, means you can't use that as any sort of a basis for valuing the property, right? The only way we can value a special use property is to essentially, and I'm not trying to be dismissive, I'm just trying to get to you that this is the reason we have to have something called the cost approach, because really the only way we can value something like that library is to figure out how much it would cost us to reconstruct it, to rebuild it. And that's what the cost approach does. Okay? So you need to know which method of valuation gets associated with each property for test taking purposes. So, sales comparison approach. What kinds of properties am I valuing? Residential and vacant land. Residential and vacant land in the sales comparison approach. Income producing property. Any income producing property. So that's commercial, it's also industrial, it's also agricultural, it's anything that I own because I want to do what? Make money with it. Which method am I going to use to do that? The income capitalization approach. The income capitalization approach is just a way to convert the property's income into an estimate of its value.
Would that still be with rental property? Or would that fall
Any income producing property. So what was your question again? Would it be for rental homes? You're asking me that? Yes, because why do I own that rental home. It ain't to live there, to make money off of it. So how am I going to value that property? With the income capitalization approach. If it produces income, it's worth the income it produces. That's the idea. Okay, is everybody good on these three approaches? We're going to talk extensively about each one and how to do them. That's when we get into the math. So, are you ready for some math? All right. The sales comparison approach. Probably good for 3 or 4 questions on a final exam right here. And why do they test it so much? Because you use it all the time. Of all the math we do in this class, this is probably the most useful math because every time you do a CMA for somebody, this is it. The sales comparison approach is what you're doing when you do a CMA for somebody. So, the subject property is the property that we're trying to come up for a value. It's the one we want to know what it's worth. If I'm listing a property, then the subject is going to be the one that I'm going to list. If my buyer's making an offer on a property, then the subject is the one that we're making the offer on. Does that make sense for everybody? It's the one I'm trying to tell my client, this is what this is worth. The way we come up with a value for that property is to find other very similar properties that have recently sold. Now, if you want me to give you a magic rule about what very similar means, then you can leave right now, because there's no such thing. Very similar means as similar as is possible. I have agents all the time that come and say to me, well, I can't find anything that sold within the last 2 years, within 3 miles of this property. What do I need to do? Well, you either need to go further back in time or further out in geography. Well, is that too far? I said, well, what is too far? Where's the rule that says, I don't know, I just always heard. Oh, there you go again. That mess you heard, right? What is the rule? Well, the rule is use the most similar thing that's available. Sometimes the most similar is not all that similar. Does that make sense? The good news for you is that on the test, there's always going to be very similar things. We're not expecting you to know. The bad news for you is once you get out in the real world, if you're one of those people who likes to be a perfectionist, CMAs are going to drive you out of your mind. Because you're going to come to your broker in charge and you're going to say, I've got a property in Bahama. It's not Bahama, it's Bahama. They don't even know how to pronounce things up there. It's so far away. Bahama. And I'm trying to do a CMA on it. And your broker in charge is going to look at you and go, good luck. Because guess what? There's nothing similar. And you're going to get really frustrated. And here's the thing. You think appraisers have a magic wand to wave? No. They're looking at the same not similar junk that you're looking at. It's not a perfect approach, but it is the most perfect approach that we have for value in residential property. The most perfect doesn't mean perfect. In fact, sometimes it doesn't even mean good. It just means the best that we have. So on a test, the reason I hammer through that is on a test, when you start trying to choose comparable properties, what ones are you looking for? The most similar. It doesn't matter. Don't have some magic rule in your head. Oh, that's 150 square feet too small, so I can't use that. Or that's 2 years older, so I can't use that. There are no such rules, folks. The rule is you use the best available. So if I give you a choice of 3, find the one that's the best. As simple as that. Okay? I'll talk just in a second about what makes them better as far as test goes. So the properties that we're using as a basis for comparison, we call them the comps, the comparable properties. That's the basis for our comparison. And comps need to be sold. It's not a comp if it's on the market. Because you need a starting point. See, here's the way the sales comparison approach works. You're going to be adjusting the value of these comps to make them even more similar to your subject property. Because truthfully, you're very rarely going to find a perfect match. Your comparable property is going to be a few square feet bigger, a few square feet smaller. It's going to be a few years older. It's going to have a 2-car garage instead of a 1-car garage. It's going to have 2.5 baths and you only have 2. We make adjustments for that. In order to adjust, you need a starting point. What do you think the starting point is always going to be for your adjustments? The selling price of the comp. That's why we have to use sold comparable properties. We can't use something that's on the market because we don't know where our starting point is. It has to be sold. We have to know what somebody was willing to pay for that property. We need a starting point for our adjustments. Is everybody okay with that? All right. So the adjustments are just the things that we make to try to even out these properties. So how do we choose comps? Same neighborhood if possible. Same style if possible. Similar size, similar features. They should be recently sold, ideally within the last 120 days, but again, there's no set rule for how far back in time is too far. You got to deal with what you have. But this last panel over here on the right, for test-taking purposes, star this. You cannot use properties that sell with special circumstances as comps unless your property has the same set of special circumstances. Obviously, if you're trying to predict the value of a foreclosure, would you want to use other foreclosures as comps? You wouldn't? You want to be as similar as you possibly can, right? So sure, I'd want to use but if I'm trying to predict the value of a non-distressed property, would I want to use foreclosures and short sales? No. Would I want to use as a comp something that Michaela sold to her sister? Why not? Well, but what does that special circumstance mean? Why wouldn't I want to use that as a point of comparison? She's going to probably sell it cheaper to her sister than she would any other buyer. So if I start using that as a point of comparison, it's not a fair point of comparison, right? It's like grading the curve in the class on the smartest kid. You don't do that. You use the dumb one to grade them too, right? I'm just kidding.
How would you know that when you were just looking at comps in the neighborhood? How would you know that this was a sale?
So it's a really good question. How would you know? If the sale went through the MLS, we're required as brokers who are members of the MLS to put any special circumstances in there. In fact, I would say in today's day and age and in our market, just the very fact that it didn't go through the MLS would be enough of a special circumstance for me not to include it. Because if it didn't go through the MLS, it means it wasn't marketed, which means to me they probably never actually achieved a true market value for that property. So just the fact that they didn't utilize a broker and go through the MLS, I probably would not even consider it a comparable property anyway. Okay, that's a good question though. How would you know? If it's in the MLS, you would know because we're required to put it in there. We're even required to put things like, gave a $2,500 credit in lieu of repairs, or there was $3,000 in seller paid closing costs. So you know about all those things.
Is there a way for a regular person who's not a broker to see that stuff on the MLS? Like
No.
the back door?
Nope. All that data is available only to members. I'm sorry? It is local, right. It is very local in nature. Very local in nature. Okay? So let's talk about making adjustments. This is the quote-unquote hard part when it comes to doing a CMA. The math here, folks, is super easy. If you can add and subtract, you can do the math of a CMA. The art, though, of doing this is making adjustments and going in the correct direction. Are we going up or are we going down? The first thing you need to know is you always adjust the comparable property. You don't ever want to talk about things in terms of the subject property. They do it on a test, but they're doing it to throw you off. You always read the comparison in the frame of reference of the comparable, not the subject. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. say subject property is better by $1,000, you have to completely flip that around, because you have to read it in the frame of reference of the comparable property. I can't deal with the subject properties. Everybody hear me on that? Because if you don't do this, I'm going to throw a shoe at you. I promise I will. You can't work with the subject property. The subject property is hidden behind a black canvas cloak somewhere. You can't do anything with it. You have to work on the comparable property. So if it says the subject property is better by $1,000, flip that around from the comparable. The comparable is what? Worse by $1,000. You have to get in the habit of reading everything from the perspective of the comparable property, not the subject property. Is everybody okay with that? So no matter what it says, if it says the comparable is better by 1,000, leave it like it is, because they gave it to you the way you need it. But if they say the subject's better by 1,000, you read that as comp is worse by 1,000. So you always are making everything about the comp. Okay? Everybody good with that? Now let's talk about the direction of the adjustments. It says if the comparable property is better, then you're going to adjust the comp down. The sales price of the comp gets adjusted down. If the comparable property is worse, then you adjust the sales price of the comp up. I don't want you to remember that, because you will mess it up. I've been around too long. I've seen it happen too often. Hold up your hands, just like this. It looks stupid, but it works. Your left hand just magically became immobile. It doesn't move. This is your subject property. No matter what criteria you're talking about, if it's square footage, if it's bathrooms, if it's bedrooms, anything we got to make adjustments for, your subject property is your basis of comparison. The basis doesn't change, right? If your subject property is 3 bedrooms, then you're comparing everything to 3 bedrooms, not the other way around. The subject property doesn't move. What does move is your comparable property. So, if your subject property has 3 baths, well, 3 baths is always right here. And guess what? If your subject property had 2 baths, guess where it would be? Still right there, because this never moves. This is the subject, right? But if your subject property has 3 baths, okay, here's 3 baths. My comparable property has 2 baths. It's worse, right? Which way do I have to adjust? Keeping in mind, I cannot move the subject property. Which way do I have to adjust to make them even? Really? 3, 2. Can't move this.
No, I thought you meant move the comparable one.
Which way do I have to move it? Which way do I have to move it to make them the same?
I thought they started the same.
No.
Oh, okay.
They don't start the same. Our goal is to make them the same, right?
I see what you're saying.
Okay? Good. You've got to add. You've got to raise the value. If my subject is 3 and my comp is down here at 2, that is a positive adjustment. I have to add the value of that bathroom. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? I know it's silly, but it works. If you always do that, it will always work. And because you know what the most common mistake is on these questions? Not doing the math wrong. Going in the wrong direction. Subtracting when you should add. Adding when you subtract. By far the most common mistake here. Okay? So let's talk about, this is an example of one. And it just gives us one adjustment. It says, in attempting to value the property at 123 Main Street in Garner, Diane finds a very similar comparable property that sold for $150,000 last month. The home at 123 Main Street has 3 full baths, but the comparable property only has 2. Full baths in the area are valued at $8,000. Based on this information, what's the indicated value of the subject property? So now, I know you don't have to do it on this particular one because there's only one adjustment, but I want you to get in the habit of how the best way to handle this would be. I always make a chart for myself with my subject property and as many comps as I have. In this case, I only have one comp. And the only criteria they gave me that I needed to adjust for is what? Bathrooms. How many does my subject property have? 3, right? How many does my comp have? 2. Now, the other thing I need to do with my chart is my chart needs a starting point. It says she found a comparable property that sold for $150,000. That's my starting point. It sold for $150,000. Now, do I have to make an adjustment for bathrooms? Yes. My subject property is always right here and has how many in it? 3. My comparable property has how many? 2. So am I worse or am I better? I'm worse. I'm starting here, so the only way to make them even is to do what? Is to increase or add the value of a full bath, which they told me was worth how much money? So that's plus $8,000. Well, my comp sold for $150,000. My one adjustment is plus $8,000. So what is the indicated value of my subject property? $158,000. So what we're saying is that based on this one comparable property, if we were to sell our subject today, because it has a full bath, we estimate it would sell for $158,000. Is everybody okay on making that one adjustment? Now, let me go ahead and blow your mind, because, well, let's do square footage here first. I guess we'll progress a little bit. Yeah, because I got a slide about it. All right, so square footage. So square footage adjustments are made using dollar per square foot adjustment. The first step is always going to be just to calculate the difference in square footage, you know, how much bigger or smaller it is, and then multiply that times whatever adjustment they have given you as a dollar per square foot adjustment. And then it's just going to be plus or minus for that amount. So here's an example of that. It says we're doing a CMA for 402 Oak Drive, and we find that a recently sold comparable property has 1,950 square feet of living area and sold for $287,000. Finished living area is valued at $110 per square foot in the area. We measure the subject property and find it's 1,800 square feet. What's the probable sales price of 402 Oak Drive? So I'm going to go back over here and make myself my little chart here. I've got my subject property. I've got my comp. And the only thing that they gave us that we need to address is square footage. How many square feet does it tell me my subject property is? 1,800 square feet. And how many square feet is my comparable property? 1,950 square feet. Now, what was the sales price of my comparable property? $287,000. That's my starting point. I always got to put my starting point at the top because I'm going to be making adjustments. Now, I like to do it this way, and you can judge whether that works for you or not. I like to say which way I'm going before I even do the math of it. My subject property is 1,800 square feet. My comparable property is 1,950, which is above or below? It's better than, it's above. So which way am I adjusting? Down by how many square feet? 150. So I'm coming down by 150 times, how much is 1 square foot worth? $110. So that's minus how much money? 16.5. So minus $16,500. That's my only adjustment on this property. So if we start at $287,000 and our one adjustment is minus 16.5, what's our indicated value for this property? 270. No, I got 270,500. Okay, I got you. $270,500.
So what are we subtracting the 16,000?
From the sales price of the comparable property. Remember, the comparable property, that's your point of comparison, what it sold for.
So not from the 1950. What's the 1950?
That's the number of square feet in the property.
Okay.
That's what we're adjusting for. The value of that adjustment, that's why we're multiplying times 150, because we need to subtract 150 square feet, right? To get from here to here. The negative adjustment, well, how many square feet do we need to take away to make them the same? 150, and each one is worth $110, right? So that's where the $16,500 adjustment came from. So we're taking away the value of 150 square feet by subtracting $16,500. And we subtract that from our starting point, which is the sales price of the comparable property. Okay? And these are going to get more complex because, as you imagine, with a real CMA, you're going to be doing multiple adjustments. There are going to be many of these adjustments on one property. Is everybody okay with that so far? Okay? Good. Now, we need to talk about the ones that nobody likes. But if you do them the way that I ask you to, I don't say tell you to, that I ask you to, they will make much more sense. We have a problem in that we say 2.5 baths. We really shouldn't say it that way because they're two different rooms. A full bath and a half bath are different things. A half bath is not half of a full bath, folks. It's just not. If you think about it, and here's where you get a problem. I'll show you exactly where the problem comes in. My subject property is 2.5 baths. My comparable property is 3 baths. Better or worse? I mean, what would you say? Better? 3 fulls is better? Better, right? Better. So I need to go what? Down. By what? The problem is I don't know because it's not half. Because if I take away half a bath, think about what I started with. I started with a house that had 3 full baths. That was my comparable property, right? So I'm going to remind you what we're doing here. Subject, 2.5. Comp, 3, right? So tell me what 3 bathrooms looks like. I'd say it's 3 toilets, 3 sinks, 3 breathing somethings, right? We'll just say showers, but it could be tubs, it could be anything, right? Does everybody agree that's 3 full baths? What is my subject property? My subject is 3 toilets, 3 sinks, 2 showers or bathing whatevers, right? If I do what it looks like is most sensible to do, which is to take away half a bath, what I've really taken away is a toilet and a sink, right? Isn't that what a half bath is? So now I'm left with 2 toilets, 2 sinks, and 1 funky ass room with nothing but a shower in it. A locker room, Fred said, right? Think about that. Are they equal now? Well, the goal of the adjustment was to do what? Equalize them. Did we accomplish our goal? Not even close.
Why didn't you take away 1 shower and leave? Because you would have 3 toilets and 3 sinks, but you'd only have 2 showers.
Because I don't know what a shower is. Showers not half. What they told me was to take away half. do is take away a shower. I don't need to take away half a bath, right? I need to take away a shower. The problem is they're never going to tell you what a shower is worth. What they're going to tell you is what a full bath's worth and what a half bath is worth. So what we have to do is separate them out into two separate rooms. Instead of viewing this property as a 2.5 bath and a 3 bath, break them up into separate rooms. Full baths, half baths. So my subject has 2 full baths, 1 half bath, right? My comparable has 3 and 0. And when you look at it from that perspective, how many adjustments do I need to make? 2. These are 2 separate adjustments because I need to make the full baths the same, and then I need to make the what? The half baths the same. So, remember, I'm always moving my comp, right? So let's look at full baths. Subject is 2, comp is 3. Which way am I going? Down. So that would be minus 1 full, whatever the value of that is, right? And then if I look at the half baths, the subject has 1, the comp has 0. So I'm going to add the value of a half bath. So it would be plus the value of a half bath. You break them down into 2 separate rooms. And you do 2 separate adjustments. If you do it that way, you'll never go wrong. So when we say 2.5 baths, it's 2 full baths and 1 half bath. When we say 3 baths, it's 3 full baths and 0 half baths. So bathrooms, just always break them out into fulls and halves. That's the rule. And then if you need to adjust, you need to adjust.
So they said that in the area 3 bathrooms are going for whatever 3,000 and 2 bathrooms are 1,000. You wouldn't have just 2.5 is 1,500, whatever the difference is.
They won't tell you what 3 bathrooms go for. They'll tell you what a bathroom goes for, or a half bathroom goes for.
Right. So say they say a half bathroom is $2,000.
Yep.
You couldn't just make the adjustment there from 2.5.
Well, let's do the real world number. And we're going from 3 to 2.5, right? So what would you propose I do?
It might not add up the same. I was saying, my question was, can you just say 4,500 less from the sale price of the value?
No, won't work. You have to do it as a 2-step.
You have to break it down.
Because, watch what the adjustments are going to be. Minus the value of minus how much money? $7,000 plus the value of a half plus 4,500. What's the overall adjustment going to be? Minus $2,500. It's not minus 4,500. It's minus 2,500. Got to split them up. And garages, you have to do the same thing. A 1-car is separate than a 2-car. So anytime you're comparing like a 1-car garage to a 2-car garage, you can't just add a 1-car garage. What you have to have is 1-car garages and 2-car garages and do them separately. Garages, exactly the same way. You cannot adjust a 1-car garage into a 2-car garage. It's impossible. You have to treat the 1-car garage as completely separate and the 2-car garage is completely separate. So, if the subject property has a 1-car garage and your comparable property has a 2-car garage, that is not minus a 1-car garage. It's minus a 2-car garage plus a 1-car garage. You break them out. They're separate things. It's going to be a 2-step adjustment.
Unless they're heated, and then they're square footage and not
That's not a garage then. Yeah, that's not a garage. Okay? Are we good with that? Split them up. So here's an example of that. Or actually, I don't have an example of that. We'll give you one. Let's write one down. Let's create one. Because I want to make sure you are okay with doing that. So, let's say we have a comparable property that sold for $210,000. Okay? Why not? Gosh, you're so needy. Thank you for letting me know. I always forget when I have to do that. We have a comparable property that sold for $210,000. That's a zero, I promise. Our subject and that comparable property is a 3-bath, 2-car garage. Our subject property is a 2.5 bath, 1-car garage. And what they tell us about this area is that full baths are valued at $8,000. Half baths are valued at $5,000. 1-car garages are valued at $8,000. And 2-car garages are valued at $12,000. So, we want to come up with an indicated value for our subject property. Everybody with me on where we're headed? Okay? So, first thing we need to do is make our little chart, correct? And I'll scroll down here and just make my chart. I have my subject property. I have my comp. And how much did we say my comp sold for? Let me go ahead and write down my starting point. It's $210,000. Okay? 1 car is $8,000, 2 car is $12,000. Okay? So now I need to write down the things I'm going to adjust for. The bathrooms. I'm not going to write just baths. What am I going to write?
Oh, bath and full.
I'm going to write full baths, half baths. I'm not going to just write garage. What am I going to write? 1-car garage, 2-car garage. Now, talk to me about my subject property. How many full baths do we have in that subject property? 2, correct? Subject property has 2 full baths. How many half baths does it have? 1. How many 1-car garages does it have? 1. How many 2-car garages does it have? 0. Is everybody okay on where those numbers came from? That's just pulling the stats from the subject property. If I look at the comp, how many full baths do I have? 3. How many half baths? 0. How many 1-car garages? 0. And how many 2-car garages? 1. Am I ready to start doing my comparisons now? Yeah. So, full baths. Subject is 2. Comp is 3. Which way am I going? Down. So that is a negative adjustment. And I'm subtracting the value of 1 full bath. And how much is that worth? $8,000. Minus $8,000. Half baths. My subject is 1. My comp is 0. Which way am I going? Up. By the value of 1 half bath, which is plus $5,000. 1-car garages. My subject has 1. My comp has 0. So that's a plus. And what's the value of a 1-car garage? $8,000. 2-car garages, my subject has 0. My comp has 1. That's a what? A negative adjustment. And what's the value of a 2-car garage? $12,000. So that's minus 12,000. And if I total all that up, let's see, the 8,000s wipe each other out. That's minus 7, so 203. $203,000 is my indicated value for that property. Okay? Are we okay? See, we're building up here. I just want you to get comfortable with the direction of the adjustments. That's the main goal right now. Are you comfortable with knowing which way you go? Okay? Good. Because that's the very basics of this process. Now, one last wrinkle that we need to throw in here is this idea of appreciation. Appreciation is or depreciation is an adjustment for time. Ideally, we'd like to use comparable properties that just sold last week. But sometimes we don't get that. Sometimes they sold 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, or 6 months ago, or a year ago. Is it likely that the market has changed somewhat over that time frame? Would everybody agree with that? Yeah, it is. It's very likely that the market has changed during that time. And generally speaking, we want to make an adjustment for that change in the market, because what we're saying with that is that if that same comparable property sold today, it probably would sell for a little bit more or a little bit less money based on what the market has been doing since it sold. In our current market, if I'm looking at a property that sold 6 months ago, what would that property likely sell for today versus what it sold for 6 months ago? Slightly more. Slightly more. We're in a market that is appreciating right now. So if I'm comparing with something that sold 6 months ago, there's a very good chance that it would sell for more money today. Now, as an adjustment, and remember, we're adjusting the sales price of the comp, right? That's where adjustments always come from. Every adjustment we've made so far has been to what the comp sold for. Is everybody good with that? So as an adjustment to the comp, what do you think appreciation is going to be? A positive adjustment or a negative adjustment? Positive. It's a positive adjustment for appreciation. For depreciation, it is a negative adjustment. Is everybody good on that? Okay. So if you have this example for appreciation, it says a comp sold 7 months ago for $280,000 in a neighborhood that's been appreciating at a rate of 4% annually. What's the adjusted value of the comparable property? So one of the things to remember about this, and you probably want to put this in your notes as a reminder to yourself, appreciation is always made to the sales price of the comp, not the adjusted sales price. I'm going to go back to the example we just did to show you what I mean. If we were working with this same property that we just worked on, and they had given us appreciation for it, you would not be doing the appreciation of this number. The appreciation is going to be applied to the sales price, that top number up there. So don't do this math first and then do your appreciation. Is everybody with me on that? Try to get out of the blinding of the light there. Is everybody okay with that? You want to be using this number at the top for your appreciation and depreciation. So now we'll go back to our example. They told us here that this property sold 7 months ago for $280,000 in a neighborhood that's been appreciating at a rate of 4% annually. What's the adjusted value of the comparable property? So we're going to take the sales price and we're going to multiply it times that annual appreciation rate. So if it had sold a full year ago, it would have appreciated how much money? $11,200. If it sold a full year ago. Oh, can you not see it on your print?
It's okay, I just couldn't figure out what
Sorry.
it was.
It blacked out. Sorry. Okay. So if it had sold a full year ago, it would have sold for $11,200 more money right now. Does that make sense? That's how much appreciation we would have seen in a full year. It didn't sell a full year ago. How long ago did it sell? 7 months ago. So what we need to do is break that annual appreciation of $11,200 into monthly appreciation. So we're going to divide that by 12, which gives us $933 roughly a month. And how long ago did it sell?
7 months.
7 months. So what are we going to do with that $933 a month? Multiply it by 7. Multiply it by 7 to get to 7 months. So that's a total of $6,533 in appreciation. And we said appreciation is going to be adjusted which way? Up. So take the sales price of the comp, $280,000 plus 6533.31. So that adjusted number is 286,533.31. It's just like any other adjustment.
They can make you round this up or down. It'll be like to the nearest dollar.
It usually say to the nearest $100 or something like that. Yeah, so rounding's not going to throw you one way or the other. Okay, is everybody good on appreciation here? I'll leave that one up since I know some of you wanted to write it down.
I need a minute to write it down.
Go for it. Go for it. I'll leave it up
But
there.
I'm not gonna understand it if I do it. I got you, I'm the same way.
Okay. Does everybody get the idea of appreciation? It's just an adjustment for the time since the comparable properties sold. That's all you're doing with appreciation. Adjusting for time. And depreciation would work the same way. It would just be a minus. What I've found is that on tests, they very rarely, I think people like to think of things in positive terms and don't like to talk about things like depreciation. So on tests, they almost always ask for appreciation. But if they gave you depreciation, it would just be a negative number rather than a positive one. You would be adjusting down.
So if you had a question where they were asking, in real life, obviously, multiple adjustments, and this was in the scheme of things, this would be applied before the other.
You can do it all the way at the beginning. You can do it at the end as long as you do it to that top number. The top number, the sales price of the comp before you start subtracting and adding. Before you make any other adjustments.
Yeah.
So you can do it first, that way you are forced to do it, or you can do it at the end, whichever you want. It doesn't matter, however you want to do it, but just make sure you're always adjusting that top number, what the comp sold for. That's right. There's no way to adjust the subject because you don't even have a number for the subject. And just remember, you don't want to do the appreciation based on your adjusted number. You want to do it based on the raw sales price up at the top. Okay? Everybody got it written down?
Not yet.
One more minute. Can I turn
Either, and I
a
need more-
sands of an hourglass over here? Do you have questions?
My computer came up with some other questions. I was doing a problem in the book,
Uh-huh.
and they gave like a 2.5 bath and comparing to a two bath.
Which is which, though? Which is the 2.5 and which is the 2?
Well, the 2 was actually the subject, 2.5 was the subject,
Okay.
and the comparable was 2 bath.
Mm-hmm.
And they said a half bath was worth $800.
Right. So they added $800.
Right. But they didn't break it. You said break it out, or
Because it works doing it as a half that way. Because what you're actually adding is half a bath.
right?
But my way always works. My way would work just fine, whereas their way will fail in the example I gave you. If you flip them around, it won't work.
So if I flip them around, meaning take away a half bath.
That's right. But if you're taking away from like a 3 to a 2.5, it won't work. It won't work.
Is there some reason you use the asterisk on the third bullet instead of the multiplication X?
No.
Okay, because you did one on one and one on the other, and I didn't know
Yeah.
if there was some sort of a different math.
No. They mean the same thing. I just wasn't thinking. I usually try to stay consistent and use the X, but I just wasn't thinking. I was probably typing it like I would type it if I was
Right.
typing it on the calculator on the computer. Okay, everybody good? All right. So just kind of wrapping up the sales comparison approach, and we're not done with it. We're going to do a lot more math about it, but just wrapping up the kind of the lecture part of it. CMAs, ideally, we'd like to have 3 to 5 comps. Obviously, that's not going to always be possible. Each comp, each one individually is going to give us an indicated value. You know, if you've got 3 comps, every one of them is going to give you a value. Most likely, they're not going to be the same. So at the end of the day, you're going to have multiple numbers. You can't go any further than that, folks. This is important from a test-taking, question-answering perspective. If you get a range of value, if you got 3 comps, one's going to give you a higher number, and one's going to give you a lower number, right? The number you report is the range. The property's worth somewhere between this number and this number. The probable sales price is somewhere between this number and this number. You give the range. Okay? Yes?
I'm sorry, so what you just said, that's the valuation of the highest comp, the lowest comp, is the range?
Yes, exactly. So if you've got 3 comps, whatever the lowest one is, that's the bottom of your range. Whatever the highest one is, that's the top of your range. And you say that the probable sales price is somewhere between. Don't average them. Don't just average them because boom, here's a number. Nope, you don't do that. Appraisers give single numbers. We give ranges of value. Okay? All right, so let's do this. Let's take our lunch break, and then when we come back, we're going to work on some of these math examples of the sales comparison approach. Okay?